Hey everybody, my name is Lenny and I'm here with Matt and we are the Wise Guys. Today we're going to be talking about children and what the Bible has to say about children, specifically Proverbs. Matt, question for you. Do you know, since last time I started with a fun fact, do you know how much it costs to raise a child, on average in the US every year?
I have no idea. You want me to guess?
Like if you were just guess.
Okay, so
just guess.
how much it costs to raise a child every year?
Yeah.
Does it matter how old we get? How old the child is, like from 0 to 1 versus, or is it just on average, like between 0 and 18?
0 to 18
What's
is what
the
I
average?
calculated.
What's the average cost? And are you including education in that?
Education, but not private education. Let's just say they went to public school.
Public
The
school.
food, the housing, the Christmas gifts, just the miscellaneous things that they do.
Oh, okay,
on
but not
average.
including like saving for college and things like that. Okay.
No,
Let
no,
me
no.
think. Okay, in the
Yeah.
in the U.S. on average. Okay,
In the
so
US.
the average number.
It might be easier for you to say Irvine.
Well, I mean, in Irvine it would be much higher, right? In California, it would be. In Orange County, I would
Yeah.
imagine it'd be like twice as much at least as the national average. I'm just gonna randomly
Let me
guess.
see.
Uh,
Yeah, tell me.
I'll guess 10,000. Yeah,
10,000. I mean, you're pretty close. So on average in the U.S., it's over 300K to raise a child from 0 to 18.
Okay.
And that comes out to be like $17,000 a year.
Okay.
In San Francisco, and I'm assuming it's similar to Irvine because
Yeah.
the standard
If not
of living is much
higher. Yeah.
Yeah, it's $35,000 a year.
Per child, but it probably.
It's
I would imagine it goes down as you have more and more children, right? Like you kind of scale
Probably.
some of the costs.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Because you already have like a stroller, so you don't have to use a stroller. You would probably save some money.
Yeah, it can have the same babysitter.
Yeah, and it drops down to to $14,000 a year in like rural Tennessee or something like that.
Okay. Wow. I mean, that still comes in over what I thought. And
Yeah,
so,
way over. I
yeah.
mean, that's basically a car. Every year you're buying a car,
Yeah.
like a nice car.
And that's only for one child, right? The
One child.
average fertility rate, did you know that, Lenny?
Oh no, wait, the average
Like-
fertility rate. What does that even mean?
Yeah, I think it means per woman who's of childbearing age. How many do they,
Okay.
on average, produce in their lifetime, I think? Maybe wrong, but it's
Okay.
in America, it's around what you would think, around between 1.5 and 2, 1.7 something.
Like children in their lifetime?
I believe so. I think children per.
Oh, I see.
So a little bit below. I think 2 would be kind of a equilibrium point, right?
Interesting.
And I think it's pretty consistent. The more educated or developed a country is, the lower the childbirth, fertility rates. Whereas
Yeah. I see.
other way around. But yeah, those are
Yeah.
just some fun facts. But I feel like we've come full circle talking about children today, because when we first started this podcast, we were going through the Proverbs, and the first one that we went through was talking about how we should honor our parents and obey them. Now
Yeah.
we're talking about children. So, Eleni, why are we talking about children today?
Well, I think it's a difficult topic in our age, especially because we're both from, like we're both, I don't know, upper middle class kind of family or people that in this day and age, I feel like children are more and more hard to come by. Like a lot of couples don't. It's harder for them to have children. I don't know if you would feel that way.
And why do you think it is harder?
I don't, kind of like you said, like maybe it's just their education, intellectual class. Maybe because they're just busier with life. Like they have a lot of careers to pursue. Children are expensive, as we talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the one that I hear most often, I mean, you can tell me because you're married, is the cost, right? Just thinking about that extra financial cost, and if you're pretty comfortable with your lifestyle, with two people working, and being able to live in the Bay Area, and like adding up the numbers, like it costs a lot to have children. So
Yeah.
that's the number one thing that I just anecdotally hear. But it's interesting because I would imagine that it's always cost. I don't see that number really for any reason having gone up a ton recently. I would imagine it's always been a cost, but yeah, I mean, we could point to different things, right? More women in the workforce due to feminism and kind of its influence in America, and then the pursuing of careers, and placing that as a priority over what used to be in the 1950s, like more of a role of raising children that was accepted for women, right, in America.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I mean,
I was thinking this week. Go ahead.
I mean, like, just speaking from me may win. Like, I don't know. Do you know the acronym DINK?
Dual income, no children.
Yeah. Yeah. Double income, no
Okay.
kids.
Oh,
Basically.
okay.
Yeah. And it's kind of nice. I mean, like, you have two incomes. You don't have children.
Yeah.
And you're kind of just doing. It's kind of like a selfish kind of mentality, but.
Well, and as long as the society doesn't, shame you into having children or expect you to have children, right? If other people are doing the same thing, your peers are doing the same thing, then it's very normal.
Yeah.
But I think in other cultures or in other times, it would be considered taboo to not have children. Or I was thinking about this in Solomon's time, or in the time of the Old Testament. It seemed like people really wanted to have children a lot more than they do in our context. I was just thinking about that. And
Why do you think that was? Like, do you
Yeah.
think it's cultural?
well, I was thinking that a big part of their religion, their belief in life, was that God gave Abraham certain promises, and gave his offspring promises of land, of blessing, of that he would multiply the nation, and they would inherit all these promises that God gave them, and that through them all the nations will be blessed. And so people viewed themselves as part of that family. They viewed it as really important to know who their father was and who their father's father was. And so you see these genealogies listing in very meticulous fashion to make sure they knew, that they were descendants of ultimately Abraham, and that would receive these promises. Then their offspring, their children, would be recipients of these promises. And so it was viewed as kind of a tragedy if you were if you didn't have children, or your line got cut off for whatever reason. And having children was therefore really important to have continuity with those promises. Whereas, and this is really interesting because I don't think I've never heard anyone say this, but when you contrast that mentality with the New Testament, the Protestant belief that it's not the physical descendants of Abraham, but those who have faith that are going to receive God's promises, then there's no longer this pressure of I need to have children to kind of, continue the line to ensure that they receive these promises. I can go out and evangelize to people that aren't in my family, and I can kind of multiply that way. That perhaps is part of the difference between modern day Western culture and ancient Hebrew culture in terms of valuing having children or not. I think people in our circles, they mostly are more conservative, and they say maybe I want to have one or two kids, but I don't want to have too many because then that would be too expensive. Whereas like for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they had many, like they were, the more the better. They're like in a competition to have more children, and that children were viewed as a blessing from God. And it certainly doesn't seem that way today, right?
Yeah, that's so interesting that you mentioned that because, yeah, I mean, in the New Testament, believers are called children of God, right? Like we have this inheritance that is promised from God when we go to heaven, as long as we are faithful. And increasing His family would mean, evangelizing and sharing the gospel to one another. And then you have the stark contrast of like in the Old Testament, literally God promises Abraham that he would number his offsprings like the stars.
Yeah, like
and
the grains of
is,
sand. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like that is like his fulfillment of his promise, like that these people, like his people, would be a people group of God, and that would be like amazing. Like that's like the biggest blessing ever.
Yeah, yeah. Whereas if God told you that you're gonna have like as many offspring as the stars, you'd
I'd be like,
really stressed out.
How am I gonna pay for all of this? I did look through some proverbs, and I found this proverb to be kind of interesting because I find it hard to believe, but even though it's true, at least in my life, and it's Proverbs 17:6, and it says, "Grandchildren are the crown of the aged, and the glory of children is their fathers." And in this verse, it pretty much just means that to have children and to have children's children and to see them grow up, raise them up in a way that is God glorifying and see the fruits that they bear, that is like the crown jewel of like my life. Like to see how my grandchildren grow up in the way of the Lord.
Yeah.
And it's like so challenging because like if I think about that, I'm like, do I really believe that? Like, do I want that? Like, I don't even know what children feel like.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine having grandchildren if you don't even have children.
Exactly.
And it's not something that you really like. I mean, let me ask you this: do you want to have children? Do you even want to have? Do you feel like it would be a blessing from God to bring children into your family?
So, intellectually, I believe that. I mean, the Bible says that children are a blessing from the Lord.
Yeah.
But experientially, I have no idea how to prove that. And it's funny because I've gone around and talked to people, like parents at church, like, how is your children a blessing from the Lord? Like, do you even believe that?
Yeah.
Is your child a blessing from the Lord? And they kind of look at me like with a blank stare. And I kind of think in my head, like, are they not a blessing to the Lord or from the Lord? But they without a doubt, they always say, yes, they are. But like
after,
you can't experience it. Yeah, like after that blank stare.
After a pause.
Yeah, like I'm like, wait. Like, like I think it's like this deeper, profound thing that you like as a single as a married person, as a non-father
right.
parent, like I will never be able to experience that. Kind of like if you're single and I were to tell you, wow, like being married, there's so many blessings in marriage.
Right.
Like you wouldn't be able to understand that because you're just not married.
I wouldn't be able to. What's the word? Like, is it empathize, sympathize? I wouldn't be able to feel what it's like to be married, but I would definitely
experientially.
Yeah, experientially. But I would definitely be able to imagine how it would be a really good thing. Do you feel the same way about children? Because if you,
I feel like
if you asked me like, would I view it as a blessing to be married? I would unequivocally say yes. I wouldn't really hesitate. In fact, I probably think like more highly of it than I would if, you know what I mean, than the people that I talk to that are married, because I've never experienced it. So I just think it's this, wonderful thing. And then people that are experiencing it, they understand that it's also challenging and comes with a lot of difficulties as well. Where it seems like most people, when I ask them about, like, before they have children, they view having children as less like less of a blessing, but once people do have children, they're like, wow, I didn't realize that I could, feel this way or love someone this way, and then they experience it as being more than what they thought.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I at least for me, I think it's been a journey. I mean, when you're like throughout childhood, I think everybody's a little bit different, right? Like some people, they feel like once they grow up, like their goal in life is to be a father. Like they want to have a boy or a girl, and like that's just their purpose in life.
Yeah, yeah,
And then on the contrary, like for me, like I don't feel like I don't want to have children, but I definitely don't feel like want my goal in life is to be a father. You know.
yeah.
And I feel like some people land on that spectrum everywhere.
Mm.
And I think the journey that I've been on is moving towards that other side to believe in the truth that children are a blessing from the Lord. And you may say, I didn't believe it in the beginning, and maybe I don't believe it now, but like once I'm trying to move towards that truth because it's in the Bible.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it, because I would say, and that's very honest of you to kind of put yourself out there like that. I'd say a lot of people in our generation, in our kind of circles, in developed America, feel the same way. As I talk to more people, my peers, and whether they're married or not, like having children is not a huge priority, where it was maybe if you talk to people in the 1950s and 60s or whenever, that was a dream, right? Like having a house, having children, like raising children, having family. Yeah, it's hard for me to really like say too definitively that, because there is the commandment of God to be fruitful and multiply and to populate the earth, right? Given to Adam and Eve, and
Right.
then to Noah and his sons after the flood. I've heard different interpretations of whether those commandments apply to us today, because if they do, in
Yeah.
a way, then it's more of an issue of obedience. But if you take the view that those commandments they're not binding to us as New Testament believers, and that there are general principles like in Psalms that children are a blessing from the Lord. In Proverbs talks about, it just assumes that you'll have children, and there's a lot of instructions on
Yeah.
how to raise them. That having children is generally a good thing, but it's hard to come down too hard for me on. I think it kind of depends on your whole framework for interpreting the Bible, and that's a larger discussion. Like whether certain commandments, whether the entire law in the Old Testament sort of applies to us, and how it does. But I think again, because of that, because depending on where you go to church or what the views are of your leaders, they may or may not really emphasize family life or children, or teach that you need to have children, especially in some of these more metro or higher education, higher affluence areas. So it's we become comfortable being like the culture that we're surrounded by, and then perhaps not prioritizing children as much. Like, would you say that's necessarily wrong, or it sounded like you're trying to get closer to that, one, to have children because you think it's the right thing to do?
Yeah. I feel like I can't speak for other people, but I do believe that the Bible almost assumes that you will have children. Like the context and the culture is that children, like, why would you ever not consider children?
Yeah, and that's
and
why
it's only
would
until
it
this-
why would it address that? Because people didn't really struggle
it
with
would
that.
never address
Yeah, at that in the original
Yeah.
context. Yeah, it would be more like
In fact,
people didn't have children, and that they would be weeping and praying to God to give them children, and like
Exactly.
that would be
Yeah,
what
they
they
were
would.
distraught.
Yeah, yeah,
And that biblical picture paints the idea that children are like a blessing, like that's something that they want.
Mm-hmm.
And the number of children, I don't know how to advise on that.
Yeah.
But definitely as many as they possibly can.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as a counterpoint, right? Like Jesus never had children, obviously.
And he also never got married.
Yeah. He's the greatest man example who ever lived, wisest man who ever lived. Paul, the apostle, as far as I know, he was unmarried. He may have been married in the past, but let's say he was unmarried, didn't have children. You know, could you argue that things are different? Because instead of spending his energy focusing on getting married and building a family and, you know, making sure they were circumcised and they kept the covenant and the law of God and received his promises, he went out and just preached the gospel to Gentiles and to people that weren't even, you know, he wasn't trying to start a family. He was trying to, you know, say, you know, spiritually kind of give birth in a way to many children who would be children through faith, right? Is that a valid, like, would I be being wrong by saying, hey, you know, I want to focus on evangelism rather than having children and having a family?
No, I mean, I don't think you would be wrong. I mean, in the New Testament, it talks about how the married man is distracted and he's concerned with the things of his wife and vice versa. And I would argue, though, Jesus and Paul, those two examples are categorically different than a married couple who's deciding whether or not to have children.
Yeah, so you're saying that maybe it only applies if you're married, that you should have children, but if you're not,
yes,
then you don't need to necessarily seek you know, marriage and children. You know, days are short and all that. So yeah.
And the Bible is also clear that as a single person you may be more predisposed to either sexual temptation or just wanting to get married, and that's okay too. And the Bible acknowledges that living a celibate or single life forever is difficult, and only certain people have that type of gifting.
Yeah, only you know, there's some people that have been given that gifting from God, and some people you know, have been made that way. Some people like whether it's by choice or not. But like, that's an interesting take. So you're saying that if someone were to get married, then it becomes a mandate for them to have children.
So I'm not saying that because I don't know if I believe that myself.
Okay.
But I think there are some Christians out there who strongly believe that to be fruitful and to multiply and to have dominion over the earth, that commandment is directly applied to everybody. And if you're capable of having children, you should obey.
If you're capable. So if you're physically capable?
If you're married.
Okay, if you're married.
Like,
okay.
Yeah. Because as a single person, you're not technically capable of doing that, like, without breaking the covenant of, you know.
But, like, does that mean if you're single, that makes it, that could be implied, you know, if you're single, you should try to get married, so then you could actually fulfill this commandment, right? Because that's how most...
Potentially, yeah.
I think most commandments in that vein sort of imply that whatever you need to do to fulfill the commandment is what you need to do. Like, if you're going to love one another, you have to kind of meet other people and kind of get to know them, right? You're gonna, you can't just say, well, I don't know anyone, so I can't love, like, I'm not capable, right? So if you're gonna have children, you need to put yourself out there, get married, you know, like, and make that possible. If you're gonna evangelize, you have to, you know, fulfill the prerequisite of, like, talking to people. So I wonder if you know, I don't know if I necessarily subscribe to that view, that because that would seem yeah, I think it's a broader conversation about like which
Yeah,
commandments or
definitely.
not, but yeah, like it's from my experience talking to people who are married, at least maybe in our church kind of circles, there doesn't seem to be a lot of urgency always to have children, and
Yeah.
yeah, like I mean, I know we've been talking kind of more on a theoretical level, and you began to share your own journey. Like, if I can ask you, as you're wrestling through that and as you're thinking, you want to get closer and closer to what you believe is God's will for you, which is to have children.
Yeah.
How does that affect, like, how are you beginning to act or prepare or kind of situate your life to be able to make that a reality?
Yeah, definitely. That's a good question. I think, I mean, I recently changed churches, and that has put me in a completely different environment where there are children everywhere,
Okay.
and there are parents everywhere, and that has, um, made me very curious and also very eager, and made me wonder and ponder if I'm missing out on something, which
Hmm.
is, I think, the key.
FOMO.
And because yeah, like I'm missing out on these blessings that God has promised for people who have children, and I don't know what it's like. I don't know what it means, but I know that they're blessings,
Yeah.
and I think that's a healthy curiosity, to want to discover, and like any new parent, I don't think I would be ready. I don't feel ready. I feel scared and fearful of making any type of decision towards that process because I know how life changing it is. I mean, literally,
Yeah.
no pun intended, life changing. Um, because the union of a man and wife, somehow God has ordained that through their union they could bring to forth like a new soul. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, going, like you said, going from you and Maywen, going from a church where there are relatively fewer children and couples with children to one where it seems like there are more, probably uh, endears you to the idea of potentially having children yourself, right? Like you said,
Yeah.
what am I missing out on? It's like a lot of culturally it becomes more acceptable, right, to have children, or more like you see other people around you making the financial sacrifice to have children, and then that
Yeah.
seems like, well, hey, if it worked out for them, it could work out for me too. It's not that bad. They seem pretty happy. Yeah, for sure. Whereas like when you're surrounded by like let's say you live in a big city and you're surrounded by people that they're just focused on their job and their career, and they don't have time, they don't have money for children, then you start to feel like that's normal, that's okay. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
community, like you said, like surrounding yourself with the church community or the right community that has a like-minded belief is key.
Yeah, and I mean, I hope that this represents most of our listeners' hearts, and I always tell myself like I don't think I know like what is correct and how to feel about having children. I feel like that's something that's constantly morphing, and I know I'm not right about how I feel, and I'm not, like completely fixated on not having children or feeling like I'm fearful of having children or not willing to change that kind of mentality or ideology,
Yeah.
because I know that I'm wrong. I'm not necessarily right,
Hmm.
and so I'm just keeping open ears and open doors to how God changes my heart, and I'm not resisting that change because I know He has something bigger and deeper in store for me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, and for being vulnerable in front of all of our
Yeah,
four listeners here. But yeah, hopefully that encourages some of you out there to just also be honest and reflect on kind of your own heart and where you're at in terms of whether you're married or on the path, thinking about that, like having children or not, which I think is a thing that most of us will have to struggle with at one point, wrestle with at one point in our lives, and we want to be thoughtful, we want to be wise about it. So I'm glad we had this conversation.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'd love to hear from you. We'll put an Instagram and Twitter handle and YouTube handle down below so that you can access us. And again, if you have any questions or comments, please shoot them by. We'd love to hear from you. And thanks for tuning in. It was a great conversation, Matt.
All right, you too. Bye.
Bye.